Hey folks, welcome to Atonuv Open Studio. This is day 5. Happy to be here. If you are just dropping by, this is a place you can send mixes in any stage. Rough mixes, final masters, demos, samples, song sketches, absolutely anything in the music production process. You can send it to atonuvrecords@gmail.com. And we'll go ahead, play it, and dial in your mix. So, send stuff whenever. If you're hanging out in the chat, just let me know you're here. If you've sent something, and then we'll, dive into it right away while you're live. Anytime, say what's up. We have 2 submissions today so far, so definitely send stuff in if you're holding on to it. Would love to take a listen. And I'm just going to give people a couple of minutes to get on in here, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Cool. So, if you're here and you've sent something, let me know. I'm going to drop it into the chat. Welcome to Open Studio. Okay, so while we wait for some folks to show up, I'm going to go ahead and just let some tunes play in the background so we don't have to just watch me read emails. So we'll get into it in a minute. All right. David has joined the track. And let's go ahead and take a look at what David sent in. So first off, we've been dialing in this Billie Eilish remix for the last few days. And I'm going to go ahead. We'll start with that. And I'm going to listen to it off the stream so that YouTube doesn't strike us down. And then David sent in an original tune, so we can go ahead and listen to that. And I'm stoked to be able to play it live. So we're going to start with this Billie Eilish mix and then move in and take a look at your original track. And for reference for everybody, David, and I have to peek around my camera. So you tried out a stereo delay trick to do left and right delays slightly differently. You didn't have a plugin that just directly had different left and right delay times, so you had to do some wacky stuff with Patcher. I'm not familiar, but I get the concept of routing. I will definitely see if it worked. I'm curious. Let's see. You did some LCR on some things, and then, did moderate panning for everything else. That's very respectable. I'll listen for that. You added some 2.5K to the vocals and compressed it and brought up the level. So they are probably good now. And you were wondering, how does one know when a track is ready for mastering? And that is a super excellent question. And I'm happy to dive into that before we listen. Your track is ready for mastering when it's done. Like, your track is ready for mastering when you are not expecting the track to get any better. So this is a philosophical thing in that never expect your track to get better or get fixed by mastering. The best master, like the best final master of your track, is going to come from a great mix. The quality of master is always dependent on the quality of mix. So you want to have absolutely no desires for your track beyond just having it fit in with the world at large. And then as a bonus, like a mastering engineer will do just like that one magic tweak to like, and we're talking about like a good mastering engineer is going to move the dial like 1 dB, 1.5 dB, and we're going to just dial in our ears. The room is dialed in, and we're going to listen to your track and go like, oh yeah, it needs 1 dB boosted at 1.5K. And it's going to be that one move that like pushes the track over the edge. And if you've done a fantastic mix and then you get back the master and you're already happy with your mix, and then that like one final move happens, then you're just going to be like, wow, my track is totally opened up. And that's what a great master does, is it's just like that last final little bit of icing that second set of ears does, and it just smooths it out. And the most important thing that mastering does is it just makes sure that your tracks are consistent throughout an album and also consistent within the like genre and the zeitgeist, and that it's going to fit in on a playlist so that your track doesn't sound like empty or weak or soft or too loud and all of that, and that it'll just like play consistently throughout the world. So when is your mix ready for mastering? When you have absolutely no more expectations for your mix. that's kind of the long and the short of it. So, David, I am going to mute the stream and take a listen to this Billie Eilish mix. And I'm just going to kind of skip through a few parts because we've listened to this for a few days. We're going to see where it's at. And then we'll go into your original track. So... Okay, David, this has gotten so much better. It's really, really nice and balanced out in the upper mids, so it's grabbing my attention. It's just really, really, really happening. Uh, this is a good mix. This is sounding really good. The vocals are in a much better place. Like having that 2.5 that you added in is just it's pushing those vocals over the top. I can hear the Billie Eilish ASMR whisper stuff, and it's super effective and it's killer. The the only thing that I would address in this is that final build, I still find that synth line that's coming right before the drop. I mean, just try like pushing it up in level because I see what you're going for with this contrast between like okay, it's going to drop down really low in volume and then it's going to hit. But it's kind of the same thing as like when you had the extreme lack of bass in the verses and then the full bass in the choruses. I think that we just need to cut the difference a little bit because the intention is there to make it like this cool, like we're low and then we're big, but it's too low. It's like going away. Um, and I know you're using headphones a lot, and it might be a result of that because Headphones, you can like pick up that detail and it's like, oh yeah, it's just this little bit of ear candy. But like on a system, it feels like the song's over. So yeah, maybe just like more volume on that. But like the delay was cool, like stuff was cool. This song sounds really cool now. Like he did it. Excellent work. So let's go ahead and let's take a listen to Cecilia. Cool. So we all get to hear David for the first time. So here we go. Okay. That's great. Great track, super clean and nicely balanced frequency wise. There is like really nice, smooth top end. We have information everywhere. It sounds good. It's a little bit below 100. I checked on my sub and all of that. It's a little bit indistinct between the kick and the bass. So it's kind of got like it's just kind of like a blob of low end. And if we just got the transient of the kick to poke above the bass, that would make all the difference in the world. Like that would be the thing. Change it in the mix and address that. Everything else, very, very good. Good track. And as far as just like pure mastering stuff, there's a couple of things that I'm wondering. Okay, so few EQs, some compression, L2, nice, cool. We agree about 100. Ozone elements. Something that I'm noticing just all over the track, are you using either on the master or throughout your process, are you using imager plugins or stereoizers throughout the process? I'll give you a second. Man, video delay. I'm going to type it just in case. Okay. This isn't amazing television, but if I just type, it's faster. Are you using the... Okay, not on the master. Okay, so okay. I think like never use a stereoizer on a master. It introduces too many problems in the last stage of the thing, and you're gonna get way more problems than you're gonna get outside of the thing. Now, as far as a stereo plugin on the mix, you need to be careful when you do it. So what I would do is, like on any DAW, you can put a plugin on the master channel, or like on Studio One, you can just click it all over to mono. You can always check your mix in mono and just see what you're gaining and versus what you're losing when you collapse to mono. There is a degree of phase cancellation that'll happen on a mono mix, especially when we're using like modern stuff and we're like pushing things to the side to make it very interesting in stereo, but you need to temper it versus what you're losing. And this track is just a little bit too phasey, like all in all. Like it was phasey enough that I heard it like in stereo. I could feel the phase. And then when I collapsed it to mono, like all of the high end went away. A lot of the like high mids went away. So I think you might be leaning on those stereo plugins a little too hard. So just check your mix in mono while you're doing it. A really, really safe way to get some stereo imaging out of stuff, and I mentioned it yesterday and then I didn't dive into it, but mid-side. So you can throw a mid-side EQ onto something, and there's lots of parametric mid-sides. There's the Kush Clariphonic is particularly nice because it's only high-end. I use this like literally all of the time. So oh, whoops, this is a mono track. Okay, so you can click this over to mid-side mode, and then this is your mid channel, this is your side channel. And this is like at 4K, this is 16K, and then you can switch it to 40K. And you can switch it between like 4K, 8K, and 16K, if I remember right. So like you can give like some high mids and some highs in your mid channel. So that's everything that isn't pushed to the side, to left, right. And then you can really open up the top end on the sides, so all of your stereo information. And then like this kind of EQ approach is a very safe way to get giant stereo width on your tracks. So it's cool. That's a good way to do it. And you can do this with like any, like most EQs now have mid-side mode built in. And yeah, you know, experiment with it, play with mid-side. I think that's a cool way to do. Cool. And you're utilizing mid-side a lot more. That's amazing. So yeah, I mean, I think you're good to go. And then lastly, I just wanted to say, like your master, you were concerned about like messing it up on the master. It's actually like really nicely controlled. Like if we pull out the good old loudness meter here. All right, mic's back on. All right, sorry, mic's out for a second. So your master, I was just saying that it was pretty good. Your dynamic range was clean. So I'll open it up again. All right, so you're hanging out at like on your peaks, -10 RMS, which is like, that's nice. Like we would consider that like audiophile grade. It is good loudness. You could push it hotter. Like your master is it's a little less than like where we would push a dance track. Like -9 RMS, -8 RMS, and just making sure that we still have nice dynamic range. And you're at DR8, which is fantastic. You could push that to DR7. So yeah, you can make it a little bit hotter. And your master chain, unless you really, really, really love Ozone 9, the elements, if it's doing something amazing for you, like, I don't know, maybe use less, use less stuff. Like 2 EQs, compression, and a limiter is usually going to get you where you want to be. Okay. David, amazing work. Really love what you've done with that remix over these last few days. It is awesome. So we're going to go ahead. We're going to get into the next track by Lexry. And I got to pull that up. For some reason. All right, let's check this out.
You, but I mean well. And those eyes that you give, they can freeze hell. All the time that you spent up in my arms, all the things I would give just to feel well, and I don't need you, or I don't think so. If I don't, then why do I feel so cold when you tell me this ain't what you need though? There's ice in the way that you speak though. Gone, but you're still here. Wish I would've fought more, wish I would've cared just a little bit more than I did. I was scared of the way that you said that you love me somewhere. In my head, I knew it was a little fake. Rather hear a beautiful lie like it was really fake. Back and forth the usual fights like this is give and take. Don't give me a reason to cry, just tell me it's okay. Things that you said and they changed me. And I know your friends for some reason they hate me for some reason. So give me something I could believe in. Eyes that I see like they change through the seasons. Love me or hate me, I cannot change. So I hope you don't blame me, and I can't explain. I'm just so afraid. I'm just so afraid. Baby, 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 need someone to save me from myself. No, no, I don't blame you. Leave me by myself. I call you when I'm fading. You're with someone else. Baby, 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 need someone to save me from myself. No, no, I don't blame you. Leave me by myself. I call you when I'm fading. You're with someone else. Change me, and I know your friends for some reason they hate me for some reason. So good.
All right, this is awesome. That's a really, really great track. I love that moody keyboard is such a great foundation for it. The vocals are great. The mix is super clean. Really, really nice frequency control. Like we're well represented everywhere in the spectrum. It sounds good. It is great. This track is good. I checked out the low end, and you've got nice separation down there. Plenty of kick transient. Bass isn't muddy. It's nice down low. There's tons of stuff to say that is great about this track. Like, excellent job. I'm gonna nitpick on a couple of things. The opening. So you've done something really cool. You've started with like all of the high end is shaved off, and we're just opening up with just like pure like moody mid range on those keyboards. The kick comes in, and we're just like we're just there's nothing above 2K there. And you know, at first I was like, oh no, is there nothing above 2K? But then the vocals come in and it fleshes out the entire top end, and that's really cool. So the mix is opening up, and then the hats come in, and then the track comes in, and then we're just working with a full frequency range, and it's awesome. So we're opening up the mix, and that's what I love to hear, where we're starting dark and then it brightens up. Like, awesome, very good arrangement. Now where I'm picky is when those vocals come in. Because there's nothing else in the top end, they're very exposed, and they're a little bit essy. Just before the track comes in, like it's to the degree that like if those vocals, like once they hit and they're nestled in the mix, it's like pretty okay. Like it's good. But when they're bare and there's nothing else in the top end, it's too essy, and I would just put a de-esser on and potentially automate it so that it turns off once the hats come in, because we're not necessarily bad with the de-essing once the mix gets fleshed out. But that said, like, leave the de-esser on, like dial it in on that opening, and then like listen to it once the mix comes in. And if you're like, oh, it's a little bit cleaner, then leave it. But if not, automate it to kick off once the track comes in. So like, yeah, so that vocal, it's S-ing like right at like 11K. So like the 9 to 11K range, that could just de-ess that, but only the auto-tune vocal. The rap and the other vocals, they sounded fine. It's just the vocoder thing, it just brings it out. So yeah, watch out for that. But yeah, so de-ess in that vocal, that's something that I would address. And then I would look out your that keyboard. So once we got to the end here, I could really feel it in the room. It's a little too phasey. So it could be the patch, and maybe you've done some widening on it, and then I collapsed it to mono, and like all the high end sucked out. So I would be aware of that. Like, it sounds good in the mix, and it sounds like the track sounds good, but we do have some major phasing happening up top. So always check your mix in mono, and you can put a plug-in on the master, or maybe your monitor controller has a mono button, or your DAW has a mono button, but always check your mix in mono and just be okay with that result. Like if you click it to mono and you're like, oh no, then you got to realize that your track is going to be inconsistent across, like, even on stereo platforms. Like if someone doesn't have their stuff dialed in, like if you have excessive phase, then it might not sound great. It could sound weird on, I mean, this is dumb, but it'll sound weird on people's phones. And unfortunately, that's going to be like the way that a lot of people listen to your music. Like, I mean, I'll admit, like, I have like this great sound system and I have a perfectly treated room, and sometimes people, like my friends, will send me tracks to listen to, and I'll still just go like, I'll just listen to it on my phone, because like my phone is on me, and we've gotten used to it as a culture. So check your tracks in mono and be okay with the results. So I would look out for that and maybe suck that keyboard in. But totally fantastic track. Really, really, really liked it. And thank you for sending it in. It was really cool to listen to. Great mix. Let's see. So I've got one more submission in the inbox as of this moment, so we'll get to that in a second. For anyone watching, this is Atonuv Open Studio, and you can send in mixes, demos, final masters, sketches, ideas, absolutely anything that you're working on, and we'll go ahead, we'll listen to it, and we'll get some feedback. If you're listening and you have something and you feel like it's a little bit rough and you don't want the entire internet to listen to it, just let me know when you send it in, and I'll listen to it with the stream muted, and we can still do feedback and get it dialed in. Yeah, so this has been super cool. This is episode 5. We'll be doing this every day from 6 p.m. Eastern Time to about 8 p.m., and you can send tracks anytime. Email is atonuvrecords@gmail.com. The link is in the description. Yeah, so send stuff in if you've got it. Say hi in the chat. You can ask questions in the chat about anything, and I'll talk about stuff. Yeah, so let's go ahead. We have a track from yesterday with a revision from Eilish. And basically, this track is super cool. Really, really, really vibey. And we talked about it yesterday, just about dialing in. The low end was a little bit indistinct. They said that they took a look at that. Pulled some stuff back into the center because some guitars were just pushing the balance a little hard. So yeah, let's take a listen to how this turned out, and we'll just kind of, it's a long one, so we'll see, we'll kind of flip through. But I love this track. This is a cool one. That low end is so much better.
Pak kde se vzal, tu se vzal, vítr nic neznáme strany rozfoukal.
Yeah, I think you killed it. This is, like, the vibe is still there, but it is so much cleaner. This is more distinct. Excellent work. We'll go ahead and just let this play, because it's a cool track, dude.
Existuje
I love that track. Feel free to drop your, social media links, and if you've got a Bandcamp or a Spotify, and you send a track in, and if you have stuff out there, definitely let all of us know so we can check it out. And that goes for anybody. And also, just got to say, we've been doing this for 5 days now, and everything that's been sent has been so cool. Everyone that takes themselves seriously enough to just ask for general feedback. Y'all have been doing really, really great mixes, so it's cool to hear everything. And definitely feel free to drop a promo link when you send stuff. And we'll put it in the chat. I'll put it on the screen. People know who you are. Which does remind me, I need to say thank you to, let me pull it up. I put up a Patreon yesterday, and I have a shout out tier, and I need to give that shout out. So let me pull that up. This is the first one, and I am finding it. Want to get your name right. Demeter, thank you. You are the first patron of this channel, and you are also a killer mixer. So thank you. This is your official shout out. And now we are going to go ahead and hang out. I'll be here for about an hour. So if you've got a track, feel free to send it to atonuvrecords@gmail.com. And we'll go ahead, we'll take a look at it, see what's going on. You can send it at any time. In the meantime, just going to go ahead and put on some background music, and we'll hang out. Feel free to ask any sort of mixing questions in the chat, or send a mix you're working on. Hey folks, this is Atonuv Open Studio. If you've got a track, you can send it on in to atonuvrecords@gmail.com. The link is in the description. Louis did ask a good question. Could I use this downtime to talk about mixing and production stuff? Absolutely. If you have a specific question about something, then feel free to ask absolutely whenever, and I can talk about it like at length on the stream. As far as just generally talking about stuff, I feel weird enough talking to a camera pointed at the internet that, you know, I could talk about any number of things. But yeah, if you have specific questions, I will absolutely provide a more coherent audio lecture. And yeah, absolutely anytime. Drop a question in, let me know, and we can talk about stuff for sure. Okay, cool question. How do DAWs How do you think DAWs influence the music you end up making? That's an interesting question. So, I mean, first off, as far as different DAWs, like between DAWs. Like obviously, I mean, the way that everything is coded, like no DAW sounds different, except for like some of the Harrison Mix Bus and UAD's Luna. I think Luna does it, but they deliberately color the sound. So there's like an EQ on the master that you can't turn on and off, and it influences the sound. And so those DAWs have a sound. Every other DAW is neutral, and if you like mix out a track and you phase invert it, then it makes nothing because it makes the exact same track. So the way that a different DAW would influence how you make music is the workflow. So like, and that's just, so this is a general talk on workflow. How do you go from beginning a recording to finishing a recording? And the DAW is going to influence that. So, people use Ableton because its workflow is comfortable to them, or they learned on it. People use Logic because the workflow is comfortable to them and they learned on it. I actually learned mixing on Magic Samplitude because I got a copy when I was in middle school because like a family friend gave it to me. So I learned on Samplitude, and then like all of the shortcuts and the key commands and the ins and the outs of the interface, and so I could work quickly on it. And that's what's important about a DAW is like, can you work fast on it? Can you get around on it? Do you know where the stuff is? So I learned on Samplitude, which is not a DAW that like gets brought up that much. It's used in like the UK a lot in some mastering houses, but it doesn't show up that much. And then I switched over to using a UAD plugin setup, and I have a Softtube Console 1 mixing channel strip, and it just didn't play well with Samplitude, so I had to switch DAWs. So I went like DAW shopping and got Studio One because it was the closest in layout to Samplitude. And that's why. That's why I did it. I was like, this is the closest thing that I can get that supports UAD, that supports the Softtube Console 1, and it it works with my brain. I feel good. I feel comfortable with it. And that leads into like a really interesting workflow thing, because the way that I use a DAW in a mix is I use Softtube Console 1, which is this it's this thing right here. So it's a channel strip, and you can work from left to right, input gain, a gate, an EQ, a compressor, and then output volume. So it's a channel strip, and you can load it onto every track in your session, and then you can work through with a physical like knob and fader and make those tweaks. And I do, or did before coronavirus, a lot of live sound. So when I was mixing a show, I had a board in front of me, and I wrote faders, and I like to have buttons in my workflow because I can do two things at the same time. I can, click around, and I don't really love like searching around with a mouse and like doing all of those fine things, which I think, as far as like now we're getting into what is the difference between a DAW and a physical hardware workflow. And like this is the crux of it, is there are just things that I feel like I can do faster with two hands and fingers and controls and like physical tactile touch. And not everyone's going to agree with that. Some people just use a keyboard and mouse and they're like super, super happy. It's just, I don't know. I'm a violinist. And I've done all this live sound, and it's a very important part of like how I work and how my brain processes things. And some people are like this, some people aren't. I kind of need to have a thing in front of me that I can touch and handle so that I can dial stuff in. And I just feel more comfortable that way, which is the crux of like DAW versus hardware. Like that's the thing. Then it's all workflow, and understanding like what the analog old school workflow and the way that things worked then can really help out in like computer DAW production. Like knowing the layout of an 1176, knowing the layout of an old mixing board. I think that's how like recording was invented, and there are just lots of shortcuts and ways of thinking about how things work that are intrinsic to the way that the hardware is laid out. And if you have an understanding of how an old 1176 was laid out, then when you dial in compression on your DAW, you just have like a more natural feel for like what you're aiming for, especially if you're using a modeling compressor. So yeah, I mean, like in a nutshell, that's the difference. It's just like workflow and understanding, and like I'm going to just keep saying workflow over and over and over and over again, because if you're working on an album and you've taken in stems from a band that that's 100 miles away, and you gotta figure out what they want on their mix via like a series of emails, and you have to like imagine the mix from beginning to end before you start it. And if you're caught up in doing a bunch of minute stuff to just get a session started, then you're not going to do a good mix. You have to start fast, and you have to make decisions really fast. And if you have a workflow that allows you to move into fine decisions faster, bigger decisions faster. You're going to make better decisions because you won't be tired, you won't be fatigued. You're going to have your best ideas the fastest, and you have to get them out like right away on the mix. So you want that workflow to help you get there faster. You can't be fighting yourself in your production, or if you're mixing for somebody else. Like every single second counts. So you want your DAW, if you're using a DAW, and like all of us are now. I mean, like the workflow to like cut tape and like splice and stuff, that's not fun. That's not amazing workflow. But you want your DAW, you know, you want to have a template, and you want to load tracks in, and you want to work through and have all of your tools laid out to get there faster. And Louis, awesome point. Using like an SSL emulator helps you make more subtle decisions. Absolutely. Because like, here is my thought on that. Like, I'll use a Pultec everywhere on a mix. Because, okay, so parametric EQs, they're cool because it's every single frequency. It's every single frequency in the whole world, and you can tweak it endlessly, and you can do little tiny cuts, and you can get rid of like 773 hertz, and you can find it and you can kill it exactly, and you can go like, yeah, I got rid of 773. But the thing is that there's 20,000 frequencies that we would have to worry about. And if we're concerning ourselves with all 20,000 all of the time, then how are we going to get through a mix? So parametrics have their place to solve problems and get to where we need to go and to clean up tracks. But if you're over relying on your parametric, then you're just gonna make a mix that's too cutty. You're gonna get too lost in these, like, you know, forest for trees kind of mindset where you're just missing the big picture because you're honing in on too many small details. So the Pultec, like in my workflow, I'll generally like clean up a track and just get it like basically dialed in, and then I'll drop a Pultec in on it. And the way that stuff was made, hardware-wise, it's not like a sound quality thing, especially with like how good plugins are now. You can get just such a good mix in your computer using a plugin. But the thing is, it's all in your mind. It's all workflow. So a Pultec has fixed frequency bands, as would an SSL emulation or a Neve emulation, or like all these analog modeled plugins, is that you have a limited number of bands to think about. And as you get to learn this plugin or this hardware, you start to learn where these bands, like what these bands do, like on a grand scale. You're thinking in bigger, more manageable chunks. So like 60, I want my kick to thump at 60, you know? And then I want to bring in, and I just use this as like a workflow guide. I'm like, okay, and you know, we can do like the boost cut thing on the Pultec, so on and so forth. Is the track too bright? Is it too tinny? Well, then I'm gonna, you know, do a big attenuate, and I'm gonna click through the bands, 3K, 4K, 5K, 8K, 12K, and I've got this huge attenuation on it. And then once it sounds like, oh, I cleaned it up, I got rid of that tinniness, then I just dial back that cut, and then it's usually good. Same thing, like if a mix is too dull, big boost. What happens if I boost 5K? That sounds harsh. 8K. It's way too thin. 10K. Oh, it's kind of nice. It's kind of chimey. 12K. Oh, that's not doing it for me. Back to 10K. And back it off and then bypass the plugin? And do I miss it? And then bring it back in. And that's my workflow. And then it, we're always worried about our mid-range, but here, instead of having 1,000 frequencies to think about, I have 5. So like 500, boost. Does it sound good? No, it sounds bad. It sounds boxy. Okay, well, what about 700? Oh, it sounds amazing in the mix. And then I'm thinking in the mix, too. I'm not soloing stuff. Everything's going at the same time. So on and so forth. And then high mids. Oh, no, high mids. Am I going to make it too harsh? Well, I only have 5 choices. So big boost. Click through. Harsh, harsh. Oh, that sounds nice on the track, and so on and so forth. So, using that old school way of just having a fixed frequency band and then having to make decisions based around that, as opposed to watching for like the minute spikes at 375 hertz and 515 and so on and so forth. You're just you're getting too lost in details at that point, and you're caught up in you're lost in the sauce. Okay? And that's the long and the short of it. Like, what's the difference between working on a DAW and working on hardware? And then that said, like, I've got my mastering desk here. It's like an SSL Fusion and a Cush Clariphonic and a hammer. It's right here. And why do I use it? 2 reasons. One, you get, like, there is a slight sonic characteristic of like a physical circuit and a physical transformer, and like capturing that with a plugin is bordering on a losing battle. It just like spices it up a little bit in a way that is not easy to recreate digitally. And then it's workflow, because I just want to have fixed frequency bands on my EQ with the hammer, and I want to have a set workflow. And then when a track comes in to get mastered, I know this set of tools. So, like, that's it. It's workflow. It's just a workflow box. Okay, Cosmic Sleepovers. Let's say you have several instruments that have interesting and different attacks, but similar sustains, and a lot of the room in the mix is being filled with just... Let's see. Similar sustains. So... you're saying that there's a bunch of sounds that are cool in their attack, but they're sustaining and overlapping each other and possibly getting in the way of each other? Also, while I wait for the chat lag to catch up, this is Atonuv Open Studio. You can send rough mixes, final mixes, masters, sketches, demos, anything to atonuvrecords@gmail.com. Link is in the description. And we'll go ahead, listen to it, give final feedback on it. And at this moment, we're in the chat and we're just kind of like asking questions about music production or anything that you want while we wait for some submissions. We went through everyone today, and I'll still be here for another 40 minutes. We'll be here from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern, so on and so forth. Okay. Okay, so we've got things that are sustaining too long. Well, what you could do is The annoying answer is you could do a big old zoom in. So the unfortunate part of audio engineering is, so like say you have a bunch of sounds and you want to get rid of their decays or their cutoffs. So you can go in and chop up waves. Like go in and go like, yeah, cool transient, and then get rid of it. If you want various attacks to come through on various instruments, then sidechain compression is generally a good, like, automated way to achieve it. So the classic sidechain setup is kick and bass, where the kick is like a short, powerful attack, and the bass is long and held out. Okay? The classic sidechain setup is to have the kick trigger compression on the bass so that when the kick attacks, the bass gets ducked. So then we've got the attack of the kick and the bass is getting ducked. So then they're not clouding each other. That's classic sidechain compression. We can also use sidechain compression for other frequency bands that are competing, like in the mid-range, guitar and vocal. They are taking up the same frequency range, and sometimes, especially if we're in like a busy rock mix where we've got a vocal going and also dueling guitar lines that are going like with and against the vocal, and we want the guitar line to be up front, but we also need the vocal to poke out more because it's a rock mix and the vocal is the most important thing in the mix. So what we can do is we can set up a sidechain relationship between the guitar and the vocal, where every single time the vocal hits, the guitar gets compressed like 1 to 2 dB. And that little bit of gain reduction that's triggered by the vocal makes the ear catch the vocal's transient. And then when the ear catches a transient, it listens to what it's doing. Like, that's the nature of the ear. And so on and so forth. So, yeah, I mean, sidechain compression, that is, if we've got like varying attacks and instruments that are in like a similar frequency spectrum, then sidechain is cool. We can also just EQ the tracks differently, and then their sustains, they'll be in a different part of the spectrum, so then the layering will be nice. And then there's just the nitty-gritty of like, you can just chop them up. You can get rid of tails. You can fade them out. You can physically manipulate the volume of the track individually. So, yeah, I mean, good question. Very, very interesting question. If you ever have something where you have a specific track where that's happening, you can send it in and then dial it in. It's kind of a case-by-case basis. Yeah. Cool. So if you're watching and wonder what's going on, this is Atonuv Open Studio. You can send tracks to the email, get some feedback on it. If you have questions, you can ask them in the chat. We're just kind of talking about, various music production things. We'll be here for a bit longer. Cool. So, yeah, if you've got questions, ask some questions. If you have tracks, send tracks. Go ahead and just put on some background music for a moment. So here we are in Atonuv Open Studio. If you have tracks now or anytime or later, you can send them to atonuvrecords@gmail.com. We'll take a look at it. This stream is nightly from 6 to 8 Eastern Time, and you can always check the replay on the channel. Gonna go ahead and put up my Patreon shout-out slide, because we do that now. Demeter, you rock. This is your shout-out. And while we're hanging out, you can send tracks or ask questions in the chat, and we can, talk about all sorts of music production stuff. Absolutely any question is cool. I'm down to talk about it. All right, this is a ton of open studio, doing this every night from 6 to 8 Eastern Time. You can send tracks to atonuvrecords@gmail.com. Rough demos, just like a cool melody that you have played on a piano, final mixes, final masters. You can send them on in, and we'll just take a look at the nitty-gritty of it, go through some mixing ideas. You can send those any time in the day, and I'll get them loaded up for the night's stream. You can also feel free to ask any sort of music production question in the chat. We can talk about it for a little bit. And yeah, we are just hanging out, having a great time. It has been super cool. This is only the 5th night doing this, but we have listened to some super cool stuff. Everyone's been sending in excellent tracks, and it has been awesome to work with it. And while we hang out for this last 20 minutes, I just kind of put music on in the background. We hang out. Don't have to sit in silence. Silence makes me nervous. Hey folks, this is Atonuv Open Studio. We do live mix feedback here every night from 6 to 8 Eastern Time. You can send tracks to atonuvrecords@gmail.com. That link is in the description. And you can send tracks in anytime. I can get them all loaded up and prepped for the night session, so feel free to send those in at any point. If you have covers, feel free to send them in. I mute the stream to listen to them in studio because YouTube is not a big fan of copyright infringement. So, but still feel free to send them in. I can still give full detailed feedback. We just all kind of hang out in silence for a minute. If you have something that you feel is a little too rough for public consumption at this moment and you still want to get it dialed in, you can send it in and just tell me to mute it on the stream, and I will definitely do that. That's no problem. And also, if you have sent something in and we've worked on it, or you know it's done and you just want feedback on it, always feel free to put a link to your stuff in the chat. Like, self-promote all you want, all you need on the stream. Like, we're all, if you are getting feedback on stuff, then you totally deserve some recognition. So never worry about that. Always cool to do here. So if you've got something, we're hanging out for another like 15 minutes. You could go ahead and throw it in right now. Yeah, and we'll do something cool. Okay, so mixing into compression from the very, very beginning. That is a cool can of worms. So in the old days, and also, yeah, Mason, absolutely. I'll put a queue up on the streams from here on out. That's a great idea. So excellent call. Mixing into compression. I can go either way on this because absolutely, you're right. You're gonna wind up putting a bus compressor on. Like, why not have it from the beginning? You want to split the difference. Like, have the bus compression on, but click it on and off while you're mixing. See what you like about it, and also see if you're over relying on it. Like, if you turn it off and your mix is bad, then that means it's doing too much and you're relying on it too much. You want to be able to dial in your mix without that compression on it. So check your work, bypass it, turn it back on. Because also, like, if you like the sound of your bus compressor and it inspires you to do a good mix, then yeah, absolutely. If that's that color and if that's what you need to just feel your mix and feel good about it, then yeah. I definitely advise against mixing with a limiter on because I don't think that you make good decisions that way. What you would want to do is you want to dial in your monitors and your monitoring setup so that you can just like turn your monitors loud enough that it's loud enough that you don't need to put a limiter on your master bus. And ideally, you're mixing with like 12 to 6 dB of headroom, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Good mix hygiene. We can talk about, because, okay, there's bus compression, and then what I use all of the time is rear bus compression, okay, which is basically parallel compression across your entire mix. And lots of people do it. Andrew Sheps popularized it a lot. And you can look up a ton of videos. He walks through like exactly how he sets it up. And I set up rear bus schemes on 90% of the mixes that I do. And it's just a really, really great way to dial in the mix. And like, I know that like in interviews, Andrew Sheps says that he just has the rear bus going from the very beginning of the mix because he knows that he's going to do it. So like, why not have it on? And that's like a cool philosophy. He's also done like 5,000 mixes. So he has a better idea of what's going to happen. So like, if you haven't done 5,000 mixes, then maybe leave some of those heavier moves for the end and just make sure that you've made a really, really good mix before you add that like final bus compression or rear bus or like all of that. Like, make sure that you just have a solid foundational mix. For anyone who's curious how rear bus works, I'm gonna pull up a session really quick. All right. I spent way too much time dialing in. Okay. 1 second. I'm going to go back I see what I need to do. Hey. All right. Well, I'm back. That was bad radio, y'all. So, here I am in a session with my routing set up for streaming audio. So, rear bus compression. So, I've got a session right here, and this is a mix I just did. It's going to be such a cool record. It's a band from Omaha called Magoo. Wow, it's good. People are gonna like this one. So, the way that I set it up, so I've got my session laid out. Everything's grouped. So drums are first, and then bass, then guitar, etc., etc. And the first thing I do is I set up a bus system. Like, that's the first thing I do in a mix, is I organize it. So I group everybody together, and then everybody's gonna get sent to their respective buses. And in this case, I've got a drums close mic'd bus. I'll just go to my bus right here. So drums close, so those are close mic'd drums, overheads, room mics, and then those 3 drum buses are getting sent to an overall drum bus. And what I'm doing here is I've grouped to get the mix is I've got the drums, the close mic drums. I want to grab like all of the attack and the snap and just like the power of the drums. So I'm EQing them as a group, and I'm compressing them as a group. I might not even be compressing that bus. There's some light EQ and gating on each individual drum mic, but I want to capture the drums, those close mic drums, as like one unit. So I've divided them out so that I can do group EQ on it and just get like a powerful drum sound out of those close mics. And then I've got my overheads going to a bus, so I'm capturing like the air and the presence and the feel of the kit. Like the picture of the drum kit is in those overhead mics, and I've EQ'd it accordingly. So that's happening. And then the room mics, I dialed that one in to get like the thwack and the like mid-range of the drums, like 500, 700 hertz, and I'm just pulling all of that sound, like that room sound, out of that bus. And then they're going to the overall drum bus, which is just like a traditional drum bus with like some compression on it. Bass bus, guitar bus, keys bus, sax bus, background vox bus, and lead vox. And yeah, in my entire mixing process, I'm spending a lot of my time working on the buses rather than the tracks individually. There's certainly stuff on each individual track, but this is also just a workflow thing. Like, I'm thinking about groups of instruments more than individual instruments. And like they sent me a good recording too, and that makes a difference, because if the recording is good to start, then I can just kind of like figure out the mix as a whole, rather than just like worrying about, oh no, what's happening here. And that's just a nice way to think, and it's a nice way to work, because this is like a 40 track session, and I've divided it out into like 10 buses. So I'm thinking about 10 things instead of 40 things. And whenever we can do that, that's great. So I've got these buses, and then I work these buses, and I do some effects and like all that, and I dial in the mix. And then what I do is I add, and I didn't label these. Shame on me. So the way that Studio One works is you can make a bus, and you can send, like, I can send a track to the bus, and it just, the fader, all of that track is going to the bus, and then that bus goes to the master. So it doesn't just go straight to the master, it goes to the bus. So those are bus channels. And then you have effects channels, which are auxiliary channels. And how that works is you can send something to an effects channel, and it sends its info alongside the original thing. So it's a copy. So it's like how you do like reverbs and stuff. So you have the dry vocal, and then you send it to an effects send, and then that reverb goes to the main. So you can dial in like how much reverb you want. So to do rear bus compression, you need to use an auxiliary track or an effects track that is getting sent from a bus in parallel with the bus. Okay? And it needs to be, you send the equal amount, so like unity volume on the auxiliary send. So no subtracting, no adding. Okay, so it's just unity, so it mirrors the mix. Okay? So I've got these effects sends, and then I send all of my buses to those rear compression sends, okay? And you do two. One of them for drums. So that just functions as just normal parallel drum compression, basically. So my drums are getting sent to the rear drum compression bus. And then everything else, except sometimes bass, you leave out of rear bus. You need to check it in your mix, you know, like, is it helping or is it hurting? So in this track, the bass didn't get sent to the rear bus. Every other track or bus is getting sent to the rear bus. Guitar, keys, sax, background vox, lead vocal. Okay? And then the buses have compression on them. Both of them, an 1176 is a great way to go. The silver face usually sounds right. And it's just slammed. Like, this is like super compressed with like really, really, really fast attack. And never forget, 1176s are backwards. So 7 is the fastest attack time. 1 is the slowest. So really quick attack, medium slow release, and you want that to just, you want to watch the release and you want it to be releasing in time with the rest of the track. The I'm gonna mute really quick. I can't leak this track. So just so you can see this compression. Cool. So we can see that, and now we can see it. The compressor is acting really heavily on that. It's really quick. It's snapping, and we're getting like 7 to 10 dB of gain reduction, which on just standard compression, if that was like on the literal bus or wherever on a track, that's like too much compression. Okay. Now the thing is that it sounds incredible. All right. So, and the mic was muted again. So, what we can see is that it's acting really heavily on the drums, like too much compression, 7 to 10 dB of gain reduction. And I'll go ahead, I can play just the rear drum bus. But I can't, no. This routing, I can't route an actual session into the stream. It's crazy. So, yeah, but basically we are compressing the drums way too much when we're doing rear bus, okay? So, but it's blended in with the original drum bus. So we get to blend in these super smashed, awesome, powerful, like smeared out, washy, just crushed drums, and we blend them with, nice, tight, clean, transient, forward drums, and we get the best of both worlds. The transient pops out on the clean bus, and then the rear bus fills out that space. It sounds awesome every single time. Then, and that's cool. That's just parallel compression on drums, nothing amazing. Rear bus on the entirety of the mix looks like this. We'll see it act on. Okay, so we can see that this compressor is getting absolutely buried. We're on maximum ratio, we're cranked up, and this 1176 is just getting pummeled, like 10 to 20 dB of gain reduction. And once again, really quick attack, medium slow release. And what's happening there is in rear bus, so we're sending everything but the drums to this channel. So what's happening is this compression, this parallel compression that's acting on the entire mix, is getting pushed down by the vocal whenever the vocal comes in, because this happens like after we balance the mix. So the vocal is the most powerful thing in the mix. So whenever the vocal comes in, it dictates this compression. And whenever a solo comes in, like a guitar solo or a synthesizer, whatever the most present thing in the mix is, it's going to dictate the compression. And it does this really cool, first off, we're getting all of this thick, like creamy 1176 just slammed compression, and we're blending it into the mix. So it sounds amazing. And it just sounds cool, it does the thing. It's like, wow, that sounds super cool. And then as an added bonus, because the compressor is getting acted upon by the most present thing in the mix, is it makes all of your most important elements jump forward in the mix. Your vocal becomes more present whenever the vocal comes in. Your guitar solos become more present whenever the guitar solo comes in. And it does this really nice, like, automatic automation on the mix. Because of just like how the transients are smearing and everything's happening, and it's happening really gently, and it's so natural, and it just sounds great. And what you do is you're increasing your perceived loudness on the entire mix. It's like getting it ready for mastering. We're just controlling that dynamic range, but we're not crushing it to the point where it's going to sound all smushy after we master it. We're just getting like really, really, really great definition right at the end stage. So this all goes back to the original question of like, do you mix with a compressor on the bus? And so I personally don't use bus compression on the mix because I'm going to compress everything in the master. I'm going to do like light bus style compression. So like I don't want to double up on that most of the time. But what I do on 90% of every mix is rear bus compression. And that's like my go-to. It's because I'm comfortable with it. Like bus compression on the master is also totally cool. Lots of people do it because it sounds good. This is what works for me most of the time. And now, as far as do I have it on my session to start with, no. I personally like to, because I see it as that like extra spice that's gonna make the mix even better. And if I force myself to dial in a mix that's really good using just like EQ, basic compression, and like a couple of effect sends for verb and space, if I constrain myself to that level of production before I go into rear bus compression, if I've made myself dial in that mix and just like slaved away at it, and then I kick in this like final spice, then it's going to be even better. And that's my basic philosophy on that the more you can work without that thing that you know is going to make the mix better, and you know it's just like your sound better button, and everyone has one. Like there's just like some sort of secret sauce that you have for your mix that you're like, yeah, this is just gonna make it better. If you can force it to be as good as it can be before you hit that magic button, then I think people make better mixes. You know, which is kind of like why I say like don't mix with a limiter, don't like don't do all of this pre-work, because if you can dial in everything and get the raw material its absolute best, then you're going to get a better final product. So, and anytime that you want to ask about rear bus, we can talk about it. It's like bordering on tough, but we could talk about it in the stream anytime. Always feel free. And you can also watch, like, Andrew Sheps has like a couple hour videos that are really, really good, and he's the guy that like made it happen in the industry, so he can describe it better than I can. And you can watch it straight from the source, and you can get like even more ideas about how to work it into your workflow that way. So I recommend that 100%. Like spend a couple hours watching rear bus videos. Cool. So y'all, it is a little bit after 8 o'clock. I'm a bit parched, so I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to sign off. And, this is Atonuv Open Studio. I'll be back tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern. Send tracks on in at any time. Super happy to listen to them. This has been super cool. Always good to hang out here. I will see y'all tomorrow. All right, have a good one, y'all.